This video is sponsored by none other than Lead Heroes, you guys. Lead Heroes has got you covered when it comes to telemarketed leads and virtual staffing. On the lead side, whether it be Medicare supplement leads, final expense leads, turning 65 leads, they just got something for everybody. They can also actually have you plug in with one of their virtual staff members on the staffing side to where you can pay by the hour for one of their trained and very well vetted staff members to help you out in your business in a virtual assistant format. Just because you watch this video, they're going to give you 10% off any order you make on their website. Link to the site can be found down in the description, so go ahead and check them out.
Okay guys, so let's talk about the first thing I ever did personally to start putting out digital content, and that was making a podcast. So many of you know that the Everything Medicare Podcast is a podcast that I host, but if you're not aware of kind of the impact that this podcast has made, here's a little bit of information about it. So at the time of recording this, we have over 240 episodes with about 77,000 downloads on the podcast, and it's a consistent source of organic traffic, revenue, and clientele for us. It's become a huge part of our business, and it's just really helped us out quite a bit. When I first started this podcast, I always heard that seniors did not listen to podcasts, and I found that to be not 100% accurate. Now, there's probably a large portion that don't, but there's also plenty that do. And what I love about our podcast, is it's really become something that is all over the place. From Apple and iTunes, right? Apple Podcasts. We probably have our biggest presence here on Apple Podcasts. It's been a huge sign of consistency for us. We got a lot of reviews, a lot of our downloads and listenership comes from Apple. And here's the thing, when you're putting out a Medicare podcast, you're going to get people that hate on you. Now really, when you do anything online, you're going to get people that hate on you. Like we've gotten some bad reviews really from agents, from what I've found. Just agents, that don't like what we're doing, like this one right here. Not impressed. But overwhelmingly good reviews for the most part. We have a 4.6 rating out of 5, which is really good for how many reviews we get. And I'm going to dive in exactly to what you need to know about creating a podcast, but I'll just go a little bit deeper into this. Spotify, you can find our episodes on Spotify. You can find our podcast on iHeartRadio. We just have it all over the place, and that's kind of been my model. I want it to be on every single site that it can possibly be on. Stitcher has been a great platform for us. The Everything Medicare Podcast, of course, the Everything Medicare Podcast is on YouTube in video version. Now, for the first 80 episodes, it was not, but now it is, and it's become kind of a big thing for us, right? So, now there's a video version on almost every episode that you can find here. Here's one I did with Joe Trottola on video version. Just different podcasts. David Duford, I have an episode on David Duford's channel where we're talking about final expense, which, there's so much you can do with a podcast. There really is. And there's so many episodes, it's just really become a huge thing for us over the years. There's so much you can do with content from a podcast also. You can have the audio version on multiple different websites. You can have video version. You can take snippets of the video and post it across different social medias. You can post them on to TikTok as just little 60-second clips from a podcast where you're saying something insightful. You can post them organically on Facebook, and that just creates content for you. LinkedIn, different pages. There's so much you can do with a podcast. It's like the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to content. We have our podcast on a lot of different websites, as you can see. It just goes on and on. Podbean, Google Cast. This is a site that kind of ranks our best episodes ever, so I thought that was kind of interesting. TuneIn. It's also on Pandora. Just on a lot of different sites and platforms overall. Now, people always ask me what I use to make our podcast on. What's our hosting platform? Hosting platform is Anchor. It's a site that, when I first started it, it wasn't owned by anybody, but ever since then it's been bought by Spotify. So now it's a Spotify-owned company, which I actually don't mind, because Spotify is a company that has really become heavily invested in getting very into and being relevant in the podcast game. They made that big investment about a year ago, maybe 6 to 8 months ago, bring over the Joe Rogan podcast. They brought over like the Bill Simmons sports podcast. So they've done a lot with podcasts, and so it just makes sense for them to buy out Anchor, because Anchor's kind of been a disruptive force in the podcast game. Now, I started with Anchor because it was easy for me. It was free, which at the time I didn't know if it was going to really be worth anything, so I didn't want to spend any money for it at the time. There are many good places you can go to host a podcast, but I'm going to teach you how to do it with Anchor, because that's how I know how to do it. The only thing with Anchor that you got to keep in mind, and there's a lot of great things about Anchor, and I'll walk through that here with you in a moment, but the bad things about Anchor is, I would say that it's very hard to essentially take your content away from Anchor and move it to another platform if you ever wanted to. That's the only thing you got to keep in mind. They more or less kind of own your content. I mean, you own it, you can get it out, but it's just not necessarily the easiest thing that you can do. And so I would say, more or less, just understand what you're getting into with Anchor, but what you can do is, it's free hosting, it's very low barrier to entry for podcasters. It gives you the opportunity to monetize and get sponsorships that they hook you up with. So there's a lot of good things about Anchor. Without further ado, I'll just kind of jump right into the Everything Medicare podcast, and I'll show you guys a little bit of the behind the scenes stuff. So one thing that's drove me nuts lately is when we got to episode like 230, there's been a glitch in their site, and for some reason it reset our audience down to 0. And for some reason, it's giving me the averages of our past 10 episodes, not taking into consideration all of our episodes. We were at a point where we were averaging about 350 to 400 views per episode, and then for some reason it just poof. So sometimes with Anchor too, the thing that's kind of weird is it's hard to track your analytics, because their platform and their website is definitely very buggy. But, just it is what it is. So if I went into the different platforms that we have used Anchor for, now the other thing is, some platforms and some sites you actually have to go on your own to connect your podcast to it. Anchor won't do it for you, but all the ones you see on here are ones that Anchor will essentially do for you automatically. Except for Stitcher. Stitcher was one I had to do on my own. All the rest of them, they did it automatically pretty easily. So boom, you have instant distribution on different platforms. But like with iHeartRadio, I had to get it put in there myself, and it doesn't track the analytics in here. Same with Pandora and some other platforms. I mean, it shows me the overall listens and views. However, it does not essentially show you under the distribution and available platforms section. So I calculate we're probably on 15 platforms or so, including the ones that it does not show here. But essentially, if I was going to go through some of the episodes here, I'll kind of give you an idea on kind of what our listenership looks like, because I know that's the one thing Everything wants to hear. Obviously, during open enrollment, we seem to get more downloads than outside of open enrollment, and that makes plenty of sense. So here's an episode I put out, 329, about Medicare Advantage $0 premium plans, which was about a week ago from the time of filming this. We got 224 downloads so far. 250 on this one, 268 here. So you kind of get an idea. This one had 443. This one, What's the Best Medigap in 2021, 356. And the downloads continue to grow based on our consistency. So when I first started, I would be happy if we got 20 or 30 views or listens or downloads or whatever you want to call them. But essentially during open enrollment, and when open enrollment's gearing up, you see that the downloads really start to take off here. And for a while there, we were doing the podcast 3 times a week, and I definitely think that helped. We simmered it down to once a week, and I think that might have hurt some of our downloads a little bit, but we were at a point we were getting 400 to 500 views almost every episode for a good amount of time. And yeah, I think that, especially right after AEP, I think a lot of people are burned out on Medicare and you don't see as much listenership, and I definitely think that's something there. But the main thing with podcasts, at least for me, is I'm a big hype machine when it comes to content. People like big, people like grand, so I try to give that to them. I try to make my titles very, very eye-popping. I try to make them very clickbaity. I want them to essentially capture people's attention. And we have some of the episodes earlier on, like some of our earliest episodes, that they've been up so long, they might have gotten 800-900 downloads, but I think you kind of get the picture here. When it comes to distribution and running ads, we haven't gotten an ad for a while. It's probably been couple of months now, but sometimes they come and go. Sometimes they come quite a bit. So we started monetizing at the beginning of 2021 in January roughly, and this is kind of what we were able to pull out in terms of sponsorship dollars, so can't be mad at that. That's another thing I like about Anchor. Now, we don't have any sponsors right now, and that's the thing I don't like, is you really have no control over the sponsors. They kind of match them to you as they become available, and it's nothing you can really rely on, but it's something you can really be able to capitalize on when they do become available. There's actually been, in the past, there was an agent that actually sponsored the podcast during AEP a couple of years ago, and paid us some pretty good money to run some of his commercials and ads for his agency in between segments and things like that, and I know he got calls from that. So you can kind of take some of that stuff into your own hands, but more or less what you're looking at is, kind of the inconsistency. You might not have that as much with some other platforms that essentially are going to host your podcast. But to give you a little bit of an idea, we're just under 77,000 downloads, which I'm really happy about. I think we would be past 100 by now if we kept up our 3-episode-a-week train, but with everything that I'm doing, I had to kind of tinker it off a little bit. The podcast has evolved, definitely. I mean, a podcast, depending on how you do it, you can do it a lot of different ways. You can make a podcast with another person. You can do it solo. My podcast has always been solo, and don't get me wrong, I've had guests come on, but it's always been more about me giving my opinions and my topics on things, and sometimes controversial. You got to understand with a podcast is it can never be boring, because if it's boring about a boring subject, like Medicare, for example, you're dead, and nobody's going to listen to it. There's a lot of podcasts out there about Medicare. There's only one Everything Medicare podcast that gets the traffic that we do. And the reason for that is it's not boring. I take the most boring subject of all time and I make it interesting. You have to look at a podcast almost like you'd look at a radio show. And if we go back to some of our episodes, it very much is a radio show. Now sometime somewhere in the weeds here, some of these episodes started to get a little bit shorter, but we were always, at the beginning at least, trying to aim to be about 25 minutes to 30 minutes long. And there's been episodes we've done, certainly, that have been 45 minutes to an hour. Like here's one I did with Medicare Bob that was an hour and a half. And it was such a good episode, it just kept going and going and going. But I think that 25-minute this is another one that I did that was just me talking for an hour and 2 minutes. If you want to be tortured, this is the one for you. Medicare Supplement Hour. But we're at a point now where we're getting well over 1,000 downloads a week, because we will find that when somebody comes on here, there's so much content. It's like a library of content. People come on and they'll just binge episodes. And they'll usually start at the beginning. So some of our episodes at the beginning have much, much, much higher views than any other episodes. But how you actually do the podcast is really not too difficult. There's a couple different ways you can do it. So let's say I went to here and I hit new episode. You can either record through your phone, which is actually how I started. I would just talk into my phone, and the app is built for that, really. The Anchor app, that was kind of the whole allure and the whole selling point behind it, is you don't need any equipment to make the podcast, and that's certainly true. I probably did the first 50, 60, 70 episodes without a mic, just nothing but my cell phone, which is amazing when I really look back and think of it, because now we have cameras, microphones, editing software, all this stuff. But even if you have a USB mic, you can hit record here, and you can talk. You can just talk into a mic, and it will upload it from here, and that's something you can do that is pretty cool. So like if I was going to test that out and just kind of show you what I mean, I'll just talk here, blah blah blah, blah 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 blah, and it will let you record up to 30 minutes at a time in here. So what we did early on when we were doing this is we would break our episodes into segments. So I do 10 minutes, and then I'd play a sponsor when we had them available. Then I would do 10 minutes and play another sponsor, just because I didn't want this to time out on me. But what I do now, and then what happens when you hit OK on that, you're going to click that plus, and then boom, there it is on your episode. And you kind of can design it in segments from here. So if I had a sponsor, I'd hit that, and then the sponsor would play right there. I don't have one right now at the time of recording this. If you have like breaking points, like this for example, let's just say that is, a breaking point or something, or music or whatever the case might be. I'd hit that and put it there. Now when it comes to music, you can use sponsored music from Spotify. The problem is you can't monetize the episode when you do that. So what I started doing is I would buy music that I could essentially buy the rights to. So like if you've ever listened to the Everything Medicare podcast, there is a, let's see how, Let me go back to Google here, actually. There is a song, and at the beginning I just used one of the generic songs that they let you use, and I just thought it sounded really lame and boring, and so we upgraded to something that I thought was more exciting at the beginning of an episode, and I'm glad we did, and I actually bought the rights to that music. So I own the rights to that music, so I can't be demonetized, I can't get in trouble because I've paid for the rights to use that music. It's not somebody else's, it's essentially mine, free to use. So this is kind of what it sounds like if you've never heard it before.
Hi, I'm Christian Brindle, and welcome to the Everything Medicare Podcast.
So you get the point, right? Like it's a little more upbeat. It keeps you energized. It's got energy behind it in the intro, and it's more exciting. I think it kind of more fits my personality and my way of going about doing the show. Like, I bring a lot of energy to the show when I'm doing it. You cannot be boring if you want a podcast to get any kind of audience built up. And the other thing with podcasting that you have to be aware of is you absolutely have to be consistent. You have to be consistent, guys. If you're not consistent with your show, like if you're just posting sporadically, like once a month or twice a month, it will never gain any traction. If you go back and look at our episodes, I'll go back here to Apple. Look at the dates in terms of our uploads. Okay, so here's March 29th. Exactly 7 days before that, we uploaded this episode. Exactly 7 days before that, we uploaded this episode. So we do not take breaks. And when we do, it's very, very sporadic. I took a small break here because I was out of town. I usually take one after AEP. But other than that, year-round, even during AEP, I'll keep the episodes going. And what I'll typically do is I'll pre-record episodes. So that way I have some stashed up, or I'll do them a couple days beforehand. I almost never do them the same day they come out. Now, the best thing I've learned in terms of doing podcasts that helps me, especially if you plan on doing it on video, is to use Camtasia, which is right here. And that's actually what I'm recording this on. I don't know if it'll let me open it while I'm in this recording, but we're going to give it a shot. So I'll hit New Project. So if you hit New Recording here, you can essentially record it, and then you can upload it into your Anchor platform here later on, and that's what I found to be the easiest thing to use, because then I have the video content and the audio content. I don't have to record it in two different places or anything like that, so it just seemed like the easiest thing to do for me. Camtasia is like a $250 one-time fee or something like that if you're going to purchase it, and what happens is when you record stuff, it's going to be in here for you to be able to mess with it and edit it. And we'll do an entire video just based off of Camtasia. This is not going to be that video. But what I really like to do is I'll create the entire video in here. I'll give you a quick example. One thing I'll do is, because we have another podcast that I do that's called Taco Tuesday. Let's Taco About Insurance. Kind of cheesy. I didn't come up with a name, but that I do with Glenn Shelton. A lot of you guys might know about that. So I have a pre-recorded intro video that we made together, and I'll just kind of drag that and drop that here into the creator, and then with the creator, I can mess with it. So like,
hey Taco Tuesday fans, this is Christian Brindle.
So, and that's an example. That music in the background is music that I paid for. I'll kind of show you some sites that I've used for that in a second here. But what I like about Camtasia is up in the corner, I can either turn the volume up, which that's way too loud, or I can turn it way down, that's way too slow. But you can kind of adjust it to what you feel is worth it. The other thing you can do is you can adjust the size of the video, right? Like whatever you want to do there. You can justify the occupancy, which is essentially going to make it show up less vitally. I always keep that exactly where it is. I just kind of leave that alone. There's a lot of things over here you can do. I want to do an entire video about Camtasia, so I'm not going to get into this too much, but I'll record this entire episode and I'll get it on here, and then whenever I record the video, I'll just drag and drop it right here. And what I'll do from there is I will then save it to my desktop. So I'll show you an example. Let's say I was just going to save this one. I do local file. And you can upload it directly to YouTube. I get asked this all the time. You can upload it directly to YouTube. It just doesn't give you as many options in terms of tagging. So I'm just not going to do that for that reason. So I'll do next, and then I'm always going to do Smart Player here. I'll keep hitting next. I don't need anything. And then I have it automatically set to save to my desktop. If you don't, you're going to have to edit this. and click that folder button and select the desktop. Otherwise, it will just save some random location and you have to go find it. But I'll call this test video, and I'll say finish. And since it's a very short video that they didn't have to do much with, it's going to save pretty quickly. It's going to be right here on my desktop. And as soon as it's done, I'll be able to, I'm just going to get rid of this. It's taking forever. You get the point. Okay, it's going to show me that's done by popping up in another browser. It's going to say, give me this, I'm going to hit finish. I'm going to close on out of it because it's right here. So I click on this and it's going to show me all these different files. I'm going to want this video file right here. So I'm going to drag this video file and drop it into Anchor, and it's going to extract the audio from it. And then I have that audio, and I can kind of mix and match it with whatever I want to do from there. But you guys kind of get the point there, I think. So then let's say it looks exactly the way I want it to. Of course, this is just kind of all over the place. It's just kind of an example, but I'd hit save episode. And then you're going to want to give it a name, right? Like, what's the name going to be? You put a description in there. You can actually publish episodes now on real time, or you can schedule them. So let's say I wanted to schedule this one for the 7th at 3 p.m. for whatever reason, right? It's set up for that. You can put in seasons, and so people will actually see that in episode numbers on the different things. One thing you got to make sure of that's an important aspect of this is when you're creating your show, see if I can update settings. Okay, there we go. This took me a while to figure this out, but you have to make sure that the Anchor logo is not going to show up on your cover art. You're going to find that in here under settings. So this is where you put your episode name in, your podcast name, short little description, your cover art, and you can create your cover art in Canva. Canva's the place that I created mine. Mine actually didn't always look like this. I just used a stock photo and edited it, but the stock photo used to look even worse. I'll see if I can find the old stock photo that we used. It was barely edited. You couldn't really even read the picture, and I went through it. There it is. That's what it used to look like. Right? You can tell there's not a lot of thought put into it, but then what I did is I came in and I gave it a little bit more love later on, and I think that made it visually a lot more appealing for people. But in Canva, which I either went over or I'm going to go over depending on where you're at in the course, in the YouTube video, you can create an entire logo right from here, and then you can upload it right into that, or I can download it if I want to use it for another social media post or anything like that. But if you don't select this to go off and it's on, the Anchor logo, which is little crappy looking Anchor logo, will automatically apply to your cover art on every platform. And I did that by mistake for a long time, so you just want to make sure that you don't do that. But anyway, guys, this is essentially all you really have to do to make a podcast. It's not hard. When you're making a podcast, this is the best thing I can tell you. Making a podcast, you really have to look at yourself like your podcast self. You never want to be boring, so sometimes you might feel like low energy or anything like that throughout life. I look at myself when I'm on a podcast as a character. It's not really me. It's a character of me that I've created for the show. That's entertaining, that's always high energy. Now, I'm a pretty high energy person to start with, but this person that I've created is never going to put on a bad show. And so that's essentially what you got to keep in mind. It's got to be entertaining. A couple people I studied when I was wanting to make my podcast is I studied Joe Rogan, I studied Howard Stern, old radio guy, probably the greatest radio personality of all time. He was an expert at keeping people's attention and getting people to stay listening to him longer and longer, even through commercial breaks, and that's how he made so much money through advertising and revenue. When you start running sponsorships, you want to run them in the middle of your show, because if you're talking about some juicy subject that is going to capture people's attention, they want to hear your opinion. You don't want to spill your guts right off the bat, because then people won't listen all the way through the end. It's not about how many people listen, it's also about how long are they listening, how long are you keeping their attention, and that's a very, very important avenue and aspect of this as well. So, giving them a tease at the beginning of the episode, then when you do get a sponsor, placing it in the middle and taking you almost treat it like, a radio station would take a commercial break. You put the sponsor right in the middle there, and then you come back and you do it again, and then you unveil the juicy stuff, right? And you deliver on what you promised them. So there's definitely an art form behind this, and that's really more or less what I do. This is how I do it. This is what I do it on, and it's been very, very successful. It's transformed my business. We've gotten so many new clients from this podcast, I can't even tell you, from all over the country too. If you're going to specifically create one about Medicare and try to duplicate what I did, expect to get calls from all over the country. That's the other thing. So we're licensed in 40 states now, so we can handle all these people. But we turned a lot of people away for a long time because we weren't licensed everywhere. And it's not really something you can just specifically target one area to, because it's a podcast that can be listened to everywhere. We even have a small portion of our audience that listens from Europe. I don't know why, but they do. It's an American thing with Medicare, but you want to really capitalize on something like this and internet fame. When it comes to marketing to clientele, you have to be able to take on these new clients and customers from all different places. So getting licensed in a bunch of states would be helpful if this is something that you want to do, but getting licensed in a bunch of states is expensive, so you might not want to start out that way. Anyway, guys, I hope you found this helpful. I hope you found this interesting and insightful, and kind of, pulls the sheet, the curtain back a little bit, and kind of shows you how we do things behind the scene. It's nothing crazy. It's nothing too rocket science-like. It's mainly just consistency, which I've talked about earlier in this course. It's consistently sticking to a schedule, providing great content, not taking your foot off the gas, and you can build something amazing for your personal brand and your business. And a podcast is a great way to do that because it's multifaceted. Like I said, audio content, it gives you video content. From the video content, you can chop it up. Like, before I close this out, look at how many great podcasts do that. Let's use Joe Rogan, for example. Joe Rogan has an entire YouTube channel dedicated to just clips from his podcast. And some of these clips, they're these little 3-minute clips. Look at this one. This 3-minute clip has over 1 million views. Just clips from his podcast. That's the amount of views. It's freaking insane, right? So there's so much you can do with a podcast when you really get the momentum under it and you start pushing it forward. But it's a great way. No matter what you're trying to do, I think you can build an audience, and there's an audience out there for almost everything. No matter how lame or boring you think it might be, there's other people out there that are interested and want to hear from an expert on it. So anyway, guys, hope you found this helpful. On to the next video.